In this video, we'll explore what it means to manage risk related to cybersecurity and what countermeasures or controls add to managing risk. Now, why do we have to do this? We don't live in an ideal world. It's not black and white, yes or no, 1 or 0. People have different likelihoods of doing things. Events are more likely than others. The impact of some of the events can be higher than others. And that means that treating every potentially adverse event as if it is the same is not very beneficial to maximizing outcomes. We have to account for the fact that some events are much more likely than others, and then when they do take place, that they could have a much higher damage potential than others, and that's called risk. So risk is a unit of measurements, and it's a unit of measurement that specifies an adverse outcome of some form of event. Now, the problem with risk is that there really is no universally accepted definition of it. I can ask 10 different people to define risk. I get 10 different definitions. Think about it this way. We can define risk as a combination of likelihood and impact, which means that we can start saying, okay, say that something bad happens. How much would that cost us if it does happen? So, for example, if our website would be defaced, can we put a price on that? Can we say, okay, that would cost the university $250,000 in damages due to reputational loss, due to litigation, whatever it may be. So now we have what's called the single loss expectancy, the SLO. One adverse event will cost X amount of dollars. The next stage then is determining how likely it is that that event is actually going to take place. That's called the annualized rate of occurrence, the ARO. We've seen this especially a couple of years ago when we were dealing with Superstorm Sandy, and they were telling us this is a 1 in a 500-year storm. Well, that means that every year we expect basically 1/500th of a storm. But if we know that one storm will cost, say, $1 billion, and we know it will happen every 500 years, now it's easy math dividing 1 billion by 500 to say how much money should we be saving each year to be ready for the next occurrence. And we can do the same thing in cybersecurity. We might say the chance that someone breaks into my systems is not that high. Let's say that we expect something like that to happen every 5 years. And that when it does happen, it's going to cost us $500,000, which is way too conservative because most breaches are a lot more expensive than that. But now we know that we should expect $100,000 in damages each year, whether or not there's an actual event. And that's called the annual loss expectancy. It's just the likelihood that something bad happens each year, multiplied by the cost of that event. And so that's our definition of risk, is impact times likelihood. At that point, we can start managing it. Now, this sounds a lot easier than it is, but to determine what the likelihood is of an adverse event is very difficult, and to determine what the impact of an adverse event is. So often we'll just have to fudge it a little bit, but it's better than not having anything to go on. Now, if we see a number, a risk that's too high for our liking, we have a couple of options. We can try to reduce it. We can try to take steps to mitigating risk, to lower the chance that something happens or to lower the impact that something happens. Either one is fine because it will reduce our risk. The other one is that we could take out insurance, make it someone else's problem, and basically say, listen, I am going to do what I'm going to do, but if something bad happens, you have to pay for it. Tell me what premium I should be paying you. And of course, the third option is always that we're going to say, okay, that's fair, we'll deal with it. The risk outweigh the rewards outweigh the risk at this point. And so a lot of what cybersecurity comes down to is risk management. What do we need to implement in terms of controls to reduce or transfer risk, and which risks are we willing to accept? We know that we cannot build a perfectly secure system. So now we have to pick and choose as to what insecurities we're willing to live with. Reducing the likelihood or reducing the impact of an event we can do by implementing countermeasures, or if you're looking at more of an administrative controlled organization type background, by implementing controls. They're mutually exclusive terms. A countermeasure is a control and a control is a countermeasure. And so what could we do to make sure that no one has unauthorized access to our computers? Well, we can ask for a username and a password. That is a countermeasure. It is a preventative countermeasure, because if you don't know the correct combination of username and password, you cannot use the computer system. I can also keep track of who is using my computer system, and then at some point say, hey, I see some usage here that is not authorized. I'm not really reducing at that point the likelihood that something is going to happen, but what I am going to do is catching it very quickly so I can limit the impact of it happening. And that is called a detective control. And then the third option that we have is automatic response. So if we see that something bad happens, a detection happens, I can trigger some automated processes or automated technologies, and that's called a compensating control. I know I'm not addressing the root cause, but I'm going to do some stuff around it that makes it overall come better. And so those are the three functions that we recognize in countermeasures or controls. We can prevent, we can detect, or we can compensate. Likewise, we can also look at the form of those countermeasures. We can see countermeasures in the form of physical measures. Things that can touch a door with a lock, that's a physical countermeasure. A light or a camera, that is a physical countermeasure. All of those things are things I can see and touch. A username and a password requirement I cannot touch, so that's not a physical requirement, that's a technical requirement. The use of encryption is a technical requirement, a technical control. The use of access controls and authorizations, those are technical controls. And then lastly, I can just set rules and regulations. I can define policies and procedures, standards and guidelines, and those are called administrative controls. Now, an administrative control can be preventative, it can be detective, or it can be compensating, just like a physical or a technical control can. And so those are two dimensions. One is the function of the control, which is to detect, prevent, or compensate. And the other one is the form, which is physical, technical, or administrative. One isn't necessarily better than the other. You have to balance out and make sure that you never have a single point of failure. So typically we would like to see defense in depth, layering of controls, where if one control fails, the next one might still catch it.